Okay, thank you. I met probably with most of you in the morning already, so I consider this more of an update, so what has happened in the meantime. And so we are now into the last couple of hours of internet voting, and we will probably hit the 300,000 mark, which could mean that we indeed will have over 50% of votes coming from internet. And we also are cautiously optimistic that we will have a quite good turnout in general. So there is still one day of voting, which is the official election day, but we will see. So for comparison, in 2019, the turnout was, if we use the same methodology like today, it was 58%. So I guess we would hope to get to 60 at least. And to put this into more of a context, so we have had quite a big change in participation over the years. Since 1992, the first parliamentary elections when Estonia regained independence, the participation rates were quite high, and there was this big decrease or slump at the beginning of the new century. But now the participation rate has been pretty stable. There is small increase almost every time. So for comparison, you can see other elections data here as well. So the red line shows local government council elections. Traditionally, the participation is there lower, perhaps also because non-citizens can also vote, and maybe they're not all interested in voting. And the yellow line is European Parliament elections voting. So this has traditionally been less popular in Estonia. And also the blue line shows the referendums. So we have had just 2 since 1992. And I also wanted to show the increase in internet voting. So in 2005, we literally had a couple of thousand internet votes that were probably a lot of these people were using their ID cards and for the first time to give digital signatures. So it was really more of a novelty than a popular voting method. But there has been a definite increase since 2011, and since 2019 we have achieved this level where almost 1/2 of the votes are given over the internet. So whether it is a good thing or bad thing, it's a matter of some debate, but so far it works for us and it works for the voters as well. And internet voting also has changed the voting dynamics if we look at the whole election period or election week. So it used to be that advance votes were a definite minority of all the votes cast. But since 2005, after internet voting had been introduced, advance voting started to rise. And now we're at a situation where almost 70% of votes are actually given before the election day. So it also changes campaigning for political parties, and so maybe it diminishes the meaning of the election day a little, because most of the voters have already voted. But there are still people who definitely want to vote on election day and in the polling station. I wanted to talk a little about candidates and political parties as well. I briefly talked about it in the morning, but maybe it would be interesting to look into the regulation of the Elections Act a little in more detail. So in Estonia, political parties have to be registered, they have to meet certain requirements, but the main requirement is to have at least 500 members. This number has changed over the years from 2,000 to 200, and now we have settled at 500 members. And they then can submit candidate lists to elections. And there is a set limit, so you can have 125 candidates at most. So we get this number in a way that we have 101 seats at the parliament and 12 constituencies. So you, in a constituency, you can have as many candidates as there are mandates, plus 2. So 101 plus 24 is 125. And the candidates are then arranged in constituency lists. So every party creates one list per constituency, and in addition to this we have a national constituency, and for that they create a single national list, and they also fix the order of the candidates. Another issue that political parties must face, and I guess it is quite a problem for parties that haven't participated in the elections before, is the deposit. So they have to pay a lump sum of 656 euros per candidate. And if you go out with a full list, so it is over 80,000 euros all in all. So it's quite a large sum of money, and the only consolation is that you can get it back if you pass the 5% national threshold. But if you don't, then this money goes to the state. However, if you get votes at least 2% nationally, then you get certain amount from state budget. And if you get 4%, then you get more. And if you get 5%, of course, then you're likely also to get into the parliament. And candidates in parliamentary elections have to be 21 years of age, Estonian citizens, and there are certain restrictions so that they have to conform to. So they have to have full legal capacity, they cannot be serving a prison sentence, and they cannot be members of the defense force. And there is also one more restriction, so the party member cannot run as a candidate in another party's list. So this rule has been in force basically since 1999, and the reason for that is that the election law before that allowed for political parties to go to elections with joint lists. So 2 or sometimes 3 parties could present one single list, and that was changed in the law, I would say quite suddenly. For the voters, the voting age is 18 years of age, and again they have to be Estonian citizens and also have active legal capacity, and they also cannot be serving a sentence in prison. And this last rule is, of course, quite problematic, but so far the Parliament has not addressed this rule. Well, maybe someday. So all in all, we have almost 1,000 candidates, a little less than last year. The reason is that there's one less party, and even though in 2019 some of the party lists were not full 125 candidates, but the increase is quite small, really. And we have 10 independent candidates. So everyone can run as a candidate. There is no restriction besides paying the security deposit. And so far, no candidates have managed to. No independent candidates have managed to be elected to the parliament. And finally, just a couple of words about how the results are determined and mandates are distributed. So this is a quite complex system that we have in Estonia, and actually not a lot of people know how it works. I think I do. Sometimes I have my doubts. But in a nutshell, so every candidate can be elected on the basis of their personal result, so how many votes they get. If they get the votes equaling to the simple quota, which means you take the number of votes in the constituency and divide it by the number of mandates. So if then the candidate gets elected, irrespective whether the candidate is an independent. If the party itself crosses the 5% national threshold or not, this guarantees a seat at the parliament. In practice, it is more difficult to do than it seems at first place. But in 1992, indeed, there were 2 candidates that got elected, even though their parties did not participate in distribution of the mandates because they didn't achieve the 5% threshold. Most of the mandates are distributed at the constituency level. So there's a proportional system. So as I said, we have candidate lists, and amongst those lists, the candidates that get the most votes are elected. So it's actually quite simple. So where it gets complicated for the average voter and for pretty much everyone is the final step. So since we use the largest remainder system, there are always some leftover votes. So the remaining seats are distributed nationally. And here we have here we use the DONT method, which is actually modified, and this is something that it's quite difficult to understand exactly. But in essence, it works the same as the largest remainder system. It's just a formula that's a little different. And here again, one of the biggest differences is that here the candidate lists are closed. So the remaining mandates are distributed to parties, and the candidates that the party has put on top of the list, they will get elected. So if the distribution of mandates in constituencies is something that people are pretty happy with, then this last bit, the compensation mandates, is something that is most often debated. And if we look at the distribution of these free methods in general, then we can see that there are not that many candidates that can actually achieve this personal mandate. I looked it up. The last elections, the most popular candidate got 20,000 votes, which is pretty good, but it's not groundbreaking for Estonia as well. And most of the mandates are then distributed on the constituency level. And as for the reminder, those, since they are compensation mandates are distributed on a different principle, and they're closed candidate lists, so you can get to the parliament with not such big result. So last time the smallest number of votes was 289. So this is what I wanted to add to the morning's discussion. I can say that right now we haven't had any mishaps in regards to voting. We're mostly getting questions about whether people can vote with smart ID and smartphones, and the answer for both questions, these elections, is no. Maybe in the future, so we can see that even though internet voting requires quite a lot of attention from the technological point of view, so the technology changes so fast that people are already asking for new voting opportunities. And other questions are just mostly about where they can vote, what voter ID is required, and so forth. So that's more or less expected. I think we have time for some questions. So if you have any questions about anything elections related, then I will try to answer these. So the gentleman in the back.
Do the political parties have to disclose their sources of contributions and disbursements that they report as well, besides just nominating candidates?
You mean their expenditures and
Yes.
sources of income? Yes, so they have to do that on a regular basis. It's these days it's not as much election related, but they have to do this quarterly, so regularly. And they have to disclose both where they get the money from and what they use it for. And there is a separate committee, party financing overseeing committee that oversees this. So here the main restriction is that in Estonia only private individuals can donate, and donations from companies, and of course the state is not allowed.
Yep. So there are no special accounts for campaign finances for the parties, but just on a general basis they have to report. So yes, please, other questions.
Thank you. I have one question regarding to the complaints and regarding to the procedure of Supreme Court. Usually the procedure of Supreme Court in your country, in my country, it's a long distance, yes? It's a long distance. But during the elections, how many complaints was addressed to the Supreme Court? And do you have a special procedure of for this kind of complaints? Because in my country, maximum in 3 days, Supreme Court have to issue its own decision.
Yep. Maybe I take this question for myself. Well, well, usually it's somewhere around 20 or 30 complaints per elections, which are submitted to the Supreme Court. First, if you are complaining on some procedures in local level, in polling stations, you have to submit the complaint to the State Election Committee. State Election Committee has five working days to decide on the complaint. Then a complaint or appeal may be submitted to the Supreme Court within 3 days deadline. And the Supreme Court itself has also quite short deadlines, 7 working days is for deciding on any kind of election-related complaint. Although if they consider the legislation to be unconstitutional, they may take a bit longer time, 2 additional weeks in order to decide on the constitutionality, because the Supreme Court is also a constitutional court and can nullify legislation.
Just a further question about campaign financing. You mentioned the quarterly reporting requirements. Are there any expense limits on what parties or candidates can spend during an election campaign? And if so, how are they determined?
Yeah, there are no limits. So the limit is the amount of donations and income that the party has. So they have to show where these expenses, how these expenses are covered. But there is no limit, and right now there is no limit on. There's no limit on campaigning at all. So all advertising is allowed without any restriction, without any limitations, and the election day has the same rules now.
Except in polling stations where campaigning is not allowed, but in front of the buildings, it's quite obvious. You will see tomorrow some campaigning going on just in front of the door of polling station. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Lolita Sigane. I am with OSCE ODIHR election expert team here. I just wanted to ask whether there are any new steps you needed to take in election administration in the connection of security situation, meaning Russia's war on Ukraine.
In regards to paper voting, our procedures remain mostly the same. So we do have some security rules when we distribute materials like ballots and seals. In terms of cybersecurity, Lisa is going to talk about this in more detail than I can. But I mean, the short answer is that elections in Estonia today are not that difficult from a non-election day. We have to be ready for cyber attacks in general right now.
Well, thank you. If there are no questions now, we can take more questions to Arne in the panel in the end of the day.